Hi guys, welcome to Signal Path. Today we are talking about the XO from Great Eastern Effects. The XO is a variable crossover filter, a sort of parallel kind of effects routing in a sense, and really just this really clever, really beautiful and creative way of getting more out of your effects. To break it down a little bit, if you're not familiar with what a crossover filter is, essentially what it is it's something that splits out signal based on frequency and based on sort of a specific cutoff, where typically like a low band will be sent to things like subwoofers, and a high band will be sent to a line array or tweeters or however the audio system is configured. Crossovers are really, really important. Especially in speaker systems, to make sure that frequencies are being sent to where they'll be served the most efficiently and the most, with the least distortion, etc. That concept is resurfaced here, but in a really, really creative way where, as you can see, there are 6 jacks. There's an input and an output and then 2 loops. And what these loops do is they allow you to put a pedal basically in this send and return of each of those bands, the low band and a high band. And so you can create really, really cool combinations of effects where you can pair a distortion and an overdrive, where the overdrive is only serving the highs and the distortion is only serving the lows, or vice versa. With modulation, and that's something we're going to take a look at. It's very, very cool because you're able to sort of have a modulation that serves highs particularly well, separate from one that serves lows a little bit better. You're able to mix and match and do some really, really creative things. And my favorite use for this effect, or not effect rather, but kind of routing system, is using the high band to split out to an octave down. And so you get the kind of the sparkly highs being kind of countered by this octave down effect, and then the lows with an octave up. And so you get this really tame shimmer, but also this really sparkly octave down, which is kind of a rarity in ambience, in ambient effects. It's something that I think is really, really cool and useful. And there's just, a myriad of other ways that you can use this to unlock potential in your pedal board. A few other features in here. So basically with the crossover, you have the ability to change the overall frequency at which this cutoff is occurring. And so if you want basically more being sent to the high band pedal, you can change this over so that the cutoff is lower. So more is being sent to the high proportionally and less to the low, or vice versa, where if you only want the very highs, and this is basically changing the corner frequency of that crossover filter. In addition, there is a range switch. This is something that essentially there are kind of reasons you might want to use this on bass. If you want basically your lows intact, but you want to fuzz out your mids and highs, the range switch is going to be your best friend. It changes basically the sweep of this filter, and makes it a little bit more appropriate in terms of the sweep of this knob for lower and extended range and low instruments, synths and things like that, if you're using it for that. Return balance is essentially the proportional balance of kind of the loops left to right. So if you kind of leave this up and you don't actually put anything really, if you leave the pedals in the loops off, this becomes a very, very cool kind of tilt EQ, where this chooses your center frequency and you can kind of balance between the bands using the return balance. But then when the pedals are engaged, it essentially sets relative level between the two. The dry blend blends between what's in these loops and your dry signal. This is something that is very, very useful for certain kinds of effects, especially modulations and things that can get a little bit crazy when you're layering 2 modulations in. That helps bring a little bit of foundation, ground the sounds you're using. And then there is a phase switch for solving some kind of inevitable essential problems when it comes to parallel mixing and all of those kinds of things. Important to have in there. And then a send flip switch, which basically means, and this is my biggest gripe with many like parallel routing solutions, especially ones that get creative like this, is that for me to sort of access a totally different approach, I have to like unplug pedals and unplug cables and rearrange things. What they did was they added a send flip switch. So basically, when you start out you've got highs on one side, lows on the other side. And rather than having to reconfigure anything, if you want to hear what it sounds like for those to be flipped, and we do this a bunch in the sound samples, so you'll have a chance to hear what that looks, and you see kind of what that looks like and hear what that sounds like. But this basically allows, once everything's hooked up, all you have to do is hit that switch, and you kind of switch places. So if pedal 1 is on highs, pedal 2 is on lows, you hit this and they're backwards. So pedal 2 is on highs, pedal 1 is on lows. And it's very, very cool, very, very satisfying. And one thing I wanted to say about this is it's kind of a cool thing. I've actually had the chance to kind of use this for a while. If you can see this, this is an old prototype, and this is something that Dave from Great Eastern sent out, must have been a few months back now. I was in the old studio at the time, and really this was 95% of what this has become. Obviously, the final production run kind of has the nice plate and some updated graphics, but there's two things I really was like, hey, it's great. There's a couple things that I think would be very, very fun, and those two were the dry blend. We talked a little bit about the dry blend. But then also that send switch, that was something that I brought to the table as kind of just a fun gimmick. I think that most of the time when I'm setting up effects in this thing, I know which band the pedal is kind of largely going to. But there are moments in pedals and there's moments in sound devices where there's practicality, but then there's also fun. And what I told them was, hey, a send flip switch is something that's going to really increase how much I just have fun with this thing. It makes setup a breeze. It makes it so much easier to just basically have it kind of on my pedal board and move things around and just be like, these are the two pedals I'm using. I'll figure out the routing after the fact. It looks amazing. It's compact, like for how much functionality is in here. It's really, really compact, but doesn't feel like difficult to hook up on your pedal board. And there's some really, really fun pairings of sounds. So let's jump into it. Let's go through kind of some of my favorite pairings, and we'll keep it brief. But if you're looking for something that takes the pedals that you already know, you already love, and you want something that kind of infuses new life into them, I think the XO is a great option. So let's check it out. All right, let's take a listen to the XO. I'm playing my Balaguer Ambient Select Espada through the Cali 76 into the Dream and Ruby. It sounds like this. And this is kind of the first intro to the XO. So there's a few controls that we need to get familiar with. The first being the crossover frequency, which is basically determining sort of where the midpoint of the crossover filter is sending to each pedal. Right now the pedals are both off. We have the Type 1 in one side and the Berkeley in the other. And the return balance basically sort of balances the relative volume between the loops. We also have a dry blend here, but this is really useful for us demonstrating exactly what the filter is doing and what's being sent to each pedal. If I set the return balance to the middle, things will be kind of roughly balanced. It'll sound a lot like my dry tone. Always remember to check phase. But if I set the crossover point to the center and sway our return balance, you are now hearing only the lower band. Dark, moody, kind of shelved. Not much life there. If I hit the send switch right here, now the spots have jumped in the crossover filter where now you're only hearing the highs. You can achieve kind of the same sort of approach right now. Obviously, when we get into effects, this scenario will change. But if I move this over the balance, it'll do the same thing. Now you're only hearing the highs, and the magic really happens here when I start moving around the filter. It's choosing basically what proportion is going to each side. So where this, comes into play here, if we engage the type 1 and the Berkeley, set all of these things to center. Right now, the type 1 is processing the lows, and the Berkeley is processing the highs. So you can kind of hear what those two sound like individually, right? All the throbbing going on in the lows and the kind of the slow pulsing going on in the highs here. And now if I change the proportion, progressively higher highs will be kind of processed by the Berkeley, and a little bit more of the band will be given to the type 1. But if I set this back to the middle here, this is proportionally more type 1 than Berkeley at this point. And now the other way, kind of in favor of the Berkeley. Now, if I really want the type 1 to process the highs and the Berkeley to process lows, I just have to hook up two pedals, because what I have here is the send switch allows me to basically flip the bands. And now that I've done that, the type 1 is processing highs, the Berkeley is processing lows. Let's bring this back to a more sane sound. Now, why I love pairing these two with the XO is because the Univibe has really, really beautiful kind of lows and subtle throbbing, and the Type 1 has this beautiful shimmery high. So when we're talking about these like dimensional kind of modulation sounds, the XO lets me kind of have the best of both worlds. Now, if I turn the Berkeley off here, it kind of loses some of the magic. It's still beautiful, kind of the dry and the Type 1, but there's something about pairing up kind of two different rate, different intensity, different style modulations like this. Bring in our dry blend, this is where I think this really comes alive the most. So let's listen to that with some reverb and delay, because I love ambience. Flip the bands. without the XO. Really nice. And this use, I think, will be the thing that wins all the ambient nerds in the room over to this thing, because this is the coolest setup that I've found. It's the first thing that's really compelled me into an area of parallel processing, with having kind of two devices in separate areas of the signal chain doing things simultaneously. But what we have is we have the count to 5 in the high band, bringing an octave down, and the mood in slip mode reverse, both of these in reverse, I should say, in the low band, bringing an octave up. In an equal measure, it sounds like this. So to hear these on their own real quick, let's bring the return balance over. You can hear that this is the high band of the guitar mixing with the lower octave of the count to 5. If we bring the return balance over to the other side, you hear the octave up of the low band. Now, if I flip the bands, and bring the balance back to center, it gets pretty crazy pretty quick. Because the high is going higher and the low is going lower, but I like the kind of contrast that's bringing things back to kind of center here. Dry blend knob. Just really, really rich. If I increase the feedback a little bit on the count to 5. Then increase the reverb just a little bit to glue things together just a bit more. next up, we're going to look at some variable crossover for overdrive and distortion. And one of my favorite ways to use this is to kind of create a larger than life distortion where you have kind of two drive pedals that are responsible for different areas of the sonic spectrum. So today I've got the Designer Drive, another incredible Great Eastern offering. This is really giving us sort of our bright, edgy sound. I have it on kind of the thinner setting to sort of show off what it does for like really focused, really bright sounds. And I've paired that with the Del Mar, which handles like lows and low mids really, really well. And so let's go and kind of bring it all the way to one side here for a second. Sounds crazy. Now if we go over to the Del Mar. Now I think you probably see where I'm going with this. We bring the return balance back to center. Now if we bring the cutoff up a little bit, it'll get a little bit of the darker Del Mar, a little bit kind of more Foley. Now, if we want to just kind of have the relative brightness and overall highs and how the highs are being processed, we can do that on the actual overdrive. So let's change up kind of the thin fat setting here. Really, really cool, I think, for like just kind of big lead lines. We can flip the bands here and just hear what that sounds like for a second. One way that I like to use the EXO is to create kind of disconnected ambient and ambience and just kind of general weird delay sounds. And so to show this and kind of explore this, I've got the non-human audio slow Loris in the low band and the Tapescape from bleak, district, electric, and the high band. Now, the tapescape is a very, very dark delay. Slow Loris is kind of a delay. It's quite dark, but it's much more than a delay. It's like a modulation kind of weirdness machine. But having a dark delay in the high band kind of lets you create this like tailing ambience that sort of doesn't poke through until you've kind of added in some of that body, but then it's something that carries much longer than your playing does. So it sounds a little bit like this. You can kind of hear that enduring repeat of the tapescape in that high band. If we bring that kind of a little bit lower, you'll hear it a little bit more prominently. You bring it in kind of a reverb, something to glue kind of everything that's going on there in that melange together. If we flip those bands, sounds even more disconnected, really.